I was in the process of developing the Poetic Justice script, and I was having problems writing the poetry of the young woman I wanted, and the script. And I just said, I'm sitting here and I'm reading Maya Angelou's poetry for inspiration. Why not just call her up and see if I can use her poems as this young woman's poems, because that will expose those poems to the world. The people that know them will appreciate it in the movie, but the people who don't know them will be like, wow, this is really interesting. And so we arranged a meeting at her friend's place in West LA, and it was a very warm, cordial meeting, and and I think it started a great friendship because just a joy to sit and talk to her about her life's experiences and musings on the world.
What other Maya Angelou poems would you have liked to seen in the movie?
Either contemporary or um, or things that all the very famous people. Well, famous, but I'd say all the very interesting people that she had encountered in her life that she's encountered. I mean, she was a contemporary of Malcolm X. She knew Kwame Nkrumah. She knew, Ray Charles, Jimmy Baldwin. So many different people that have influenced my life as an artist. Maya Angelou was friends with, and so the opportunity to have her be a part of my film and the honor of her letting me use some of her poetry in the film, and then making an appearance in the film was really was something. She was like, she became somewhat like an aunt to me.
How was she a part of it? She did a cameo. Mm-hmm. Was she on?
She did 3 days. Well, yeah, she did 3 days acting in it, and it's really funny because, I had scripted lines and stuff, but I'm like, hey, I'm a kid. I'm like, you know what? I had Dr. Angelou here, and then I had 2 other women that were actresses, and I said, what we're going to do with this? We're just going to improv this. We're going to improv because your words, whatever you're going to improv, is much more eloquent and interesting than anything that I could possibly write. At that point, and I would roll the camera, and I'd sit. There's a really great scene in the picture that I guess you can, where she's talking about. She's making a comment about the youth of today, and it's basically just, Maya, flowing about her perspective of what the youth of today, and how they are about love and different things and stuff, right? And I use her voiceover to comment on what's happening in the environment in which they are, and it was phenomenal, And it's funny because at a certain point, and she'll tell you this, I kept pushing and said, for more and more improvisation, going through, reels of film and stuff. And then at a certain point, she just like, okay, Mr. Singleton, I have no more words to write for you. She's basically like directing herself and I'm not giving you no more words. I gave you enough for the day. You're going to have to make do with what you have right there. And hey, I take it for what it was, I love her. She's like, as artists, budding artists in our early 20s, like people like myself at that time, and like Tupac, we had been raised on her poetry. We had been raised on Maya Angelou's personal expressions, whether or not they're being her literary work or her acting or her making public appearances on whatever it was on television. So for her to be around us, in our early 20s was like an honor. It was like, wow, this is our auntie, you know what I'm saying? So, we all were kind of humbled by being in her presence. And everybody tried, to a certain degree to be on their best behavior, with a few incidences, but, it's like...
That's exactly where I want to go, to the Tupac incident.
Yes.
So we hear her tell the story all the time.
Yes.
I could summarize it, but I think you know the story I'm talking
Yes,
about.
yes.
And so I want to hear it from your perspective. What happened that day on the set?
Okay, you have to understand that with the incident on the set of Poetic Justice, when Tupac had a tantrum, that we were a few days prior after the '92 riots. Okay, that happened in Los Angeles and around. So the whole set was really tense, and there was this extra that was on the set, and he was constantly goading Tupac from afar, making derivations of his name, just different types of things, and heckling him. And Pac, he was a kid. He was 20 years old. All of the stuff that was going and swirling around him was new to him. It was all new to him, being, the star of the movie, opposite Janet Jackson, who was already an established talent. And he's like thrust at 20 years old to be on parity with her and hang, And so when the dude, kept flashing at him, at a certain point, he just went for the dude. He's like, he's gonna whoop his ass, and going after him, chasing him all around and everything. And the crew was chasing them all, trying to calm them down and stuff, and nobody could calm him down. He was just a straight tornado. And Dr. Angelou just said, "Honey, come here. Honey, come here. Come here. Come to me. And she came to them. He came to her, and she put her arms around him, and she just walked him away. And they had their own private moment. I don't know everything that was said in that private moment and stuff, right? But, for someone like a young artist at 20 years old, for Pac, who considered himself a poet himself, a budding poet himself, to have, a literary, an artistic figurehead like Dr. Maya Angelou hug him and talk to him, you know what I mean, and guide him. For him, it was like, it was golden. It was a golden moment. He told his mother, Fanny Shakur, about it, and Fanny wrote Maya a letter and thank you for looking out for Pac. And it was a very confusing time for him. It's really interesting that two pivotal figures of the late 20th century would meet, on a movie set like that. I think it's very indelible. Poetic Justice is one project and everything, but I did it when I was very, very young. And this a movie that I did a few years later after Poetic Justice, because I have a dubious thing about that movie, could I have made it better, what it was, and with this, I kind of rushed it and everything. It does sort of have her poetry and everything, but there's another movie that I made that Dr. Angelou saw called Rosewood, and I made it a few years after Poetic Justice. And I don't think she was really very proud of Poetic Justice, you know what I mean? Because there was a lot of cursing in it. When I showed it to her, she was like, so much cursing in it. I think she was appalled about the cursing. But the cursing and these characters not being able to articulate their words elevates the poetry, and what's happening and with this girl, and her expressing, you know what I mean? So, whatever it is, a pop culture expression, whatever. But getting back to this, I saw her a few years later, and she had seen the film that I had made called Rosewood, which was about an incident in the 1920s in Florida. And she says to me, she gives me this warm hug, motherly hug, and she says, "Baby, you've done it. You've done it. You've done it." I hope I did a good impression of her. But that made me feel so good, because she really, she really gave me some love and respect as an artist, doing something that it was telling a story that was a very difficult story to tell, that that I actually gave up a lot of blood, sweat, and tears for, and the stories that she tells within her biographies and sometimes in her oral storytelling and her poetry are visions and expressions that are in our souls, but only she can articulate. And that's what really makes her very, very special as an artist.
Right prior to the release of Poetic Justice, you named your daughter Justice Maya Singleton.
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it's funny you bring that up. I was going to tell you that. Yeah, my oldest daughter is named Justice Maya Singleton in honor of Maya Angelou. And, it's just because I have such a reverence and respect and love for her as a person. And, she's been a guiding force to me. I've spent time at her home in Winston-Salem. She makes a mean apple cider. She makes a mean apple cider. She cooked, several times and stuff. And, it's almost like being with your grandmother, you know what I mean? Who's like, who wants and accepts your love, but then, you're like a pesky fly, and I would sit there with her and her friends. And they're like, these old biddy women, sitting bickering and talking and about the past and different things that, that concern them, contemporary, but the past and stuff. And she would go, and I learned to be very quiet because I turned into like a 10-year-old boy at this point. And she's talking about different things and different figures. And then, I would interject and say, well, can you tell me a little bit about, how was Jimmy Baldwin? How was Jimmy Baldwin as a person? And she goes, she just silences me, like this, like, oh God, I'm like, what can I ask about? Because I have a dozen other things I would love to ask, about her time in Africa and, her times as a dancer and the period, in which, she spent time with Malcolm X and, and Alex Haley and Ray Charles and all the different stories that she has and stuff. But it's like, pulling it out. But I love her because you have a woman that is like, who's like a tree trunk. You know what I mean? She's like a redwood, and she has deep roots within American culture. You know what I mean? American culture first and foremost, in the tradition of storytellers like Mark Twain, and she just really, is one of those people that at whatever period in which she was flowing, she was doing something for the betterment of creativity, and she just, and she explored all of those various things, and I love it. At the heart and soul of her is in this tradition of the tradition of African oral storytelling, and that's where it all begins. If you can express yourself and tell a story orally and capture an audience or a group of people, orally, that it takes you all the way back to the tribal days where people gathered around the fire, and someone would go and express and tell out the stories of the tribe. And that's what she is. She is the tribal queen of storytelling.
This video raises questions, and I need for you to be extremely honest in the comments when answering them. And just so you know, I have 3 questions. Number 1, what are your thoughts about Maya Angelou? Number 2, what are your thoughts about John Singleton? And number 3, Rosewood versus Poetic Justice. Which movie was better for you? Now, please be honest in the comments when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.